Hi and hello watch fans, and welcome to another edition of The Real Time Show with me, your friendly neighbourhood watchmaker Rob Nuds, and your friendly neighbourhood jeweller Alon Ben Joseph. We're back in the studio together for the first time in many weeks to record a long overdue Q&A session and to buzz through many of the outstanding questions in our bulging mailbag. Alon, good to hear you again.
Good to hear you, buddy, and thank you to the TRTS community for nudging us, because they have been asking for you and I to sit down again, to jam old school Q&A sessions. We apologize. A has been busy. B, we had to make space for the TRT network. So not TRTS, but the real-time network, to host other podcasters on our network, on our syndicate. So we are not by any means planning to diminish the quantity of episodes we want to publish, just we needed to create some space. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for all your questions. Rob, what's the first one?
Yeah, very good question. So this one comes in from Michael, and he says, have you ever heard of the Transylvanian brand Perrin? And if so, what do you think of it? Now, this is a timely one because in between Michael sending us this question and us recording this episode today, I actually had the most recent Perrin watch, the Regia, in my hands and had the chance to review it for Watch Geckos. You can go on Watch Gecko and check out the review on the magazine. And I have to say that it, along with a lot of Andy Beaker, who's the founder's previous work, is a real joy. And there's a lot more going on than maybe is first apparent with this watch. But before we dig into that specifically and what came before it, Alon, is Perrin a brand that's been on your radar?
Not at all. So, Michael, thank you, A, very much for pointing it out to me. And B, I had to Google it. And I'm actually very much impressed because in Dutch, peren is a multiple for peer. And peer is, as you might maybe guess, it's a pair. So cool name. I don't know anything about it. So Rob, please school us.
Well, it's been around for quite some time now, and I've been in contact with Andy for years. I think we met for the first time many moons ago, I think in Munich, but memory doesn't always serve me so well, so I have to ask him for corroboration on that fact. But he reached out to me when I think I must have been writing for a blog to watch back in the day, and we had quite a bit of contact during my time at Fratello, and he even donated one of his previous models to us as a giveaway, which was very kind of him and very well received by the audience. Perrin has managed to make a very nice series of watches that follow a consistent design principle, not just inspired by Andy's home region of what was Transylvania, now part of Romania, I believe, but also the philosophy behind the design, which is, I would say, disparity between light and dark levels and all things that should contradict one another but pull together in the same model. Now, the exciting thing for me is that he manages to do this and tell his story very effectively without it being in any way grotesque or over the top. It's subtle. At first glance, the watches look like many other standard daily wear dive watches, but there's just that attention to detail, the thoughtfulness in them that I think separates the brand from many others in its price point. And I'm sure it's not for everybody. I'm sure some people would look at it and wouldn't really see what I see as special about it, but that's totally fine because he doesn't need a huge audience to keep the company going, as he's managed to do successfully for almost a decade now, actually. But I love the little twists that he puts on standard things. So take the Nearer, for example, which was an older model. The dial, at first glance, appears to just be flat black, but in some iterations, it is this incredible deep blue-green, which is inspired by the color of one of his favorite lakes nearby where he hails from. So you've had a chance to have a look at it online, Alon. You've seen that he's had quite a lot of coverage from major blogs, including Fratello, Monochrome, Time and Tide, Worn and Wound, etc., etc. And he has a following. What do you think of it?
I'm actually very much impressed because what I like, he took the tool watch into the 21st century. Human beings always do that. We always compare people to celebrities. We compare new watches to old watches or the mainstream watches. But for argument's sake, and because we're an audio-only podcast, I have to. So the first vibes I got, it's like Unimatic had a baby with Serica. And that's a compliment. It's a very handsome baby. So I like the design style. It is a bit less is more, but very tool watch-esque. And I saw the pricing is around $750. So what calibers does he use? Because I see it's fully Swiss made.
Yeah, he has Sellita SW200s in these, which is, a great and bad thing for many other brands around him. I'd say that it's mostly a bad thing for other brands because a lot of consumers are very well aware that you can get a Sellita in watches that start at a few €100, often quite poorly made otherwise from the movement, and you get watches that run into the several thousands that are powered by Sellitas as well. Now, of course, there are often very good reasons for why certain watches powered by Sellitas cost a lot more than this, but it is also just a fact that if you prioritize Swiss made, as Andy has done, you can get a very good watch for not so much money. And another thing that one always has to be aware of course, is margins. And he doesn't have a huge margin, which is why the watches are so affordable. And furthermore, he's really put his effort into creating designs that are well executable at that price point. So take a look at the finishes, take a look at the case shapes. There's nothing about the Perrin watches that itself is hugely revolutionary in the way a watch is constructed or shaped, but he's just put his mind to work on how to create that differentiation in smart, cost-effective ways. So ultimately, very good product at that sub 1,000 bracket. It's a great story, great pieces. And I loved your comparison with Serica because Serica was the one that also jumped out. It's a younger brand than Perrin, but also equally successful for very, very similar reasons. Different designs, but very similar in spirit, I think, in making those smart design decisions to get a great product for a reasonable price. And although I don't think the two watches look anything like each other, it's a really good one to stand side by side. And I could see someone having a nice little collection of these really high value, well explained brands that constitutes in itself like a nice homogeneous collection.
I've been looking at the website while listening to you, and I'm actually very much triggered because if a follow-up question is, would you buy one? The answer is A, hell yes. B, which one? It's going to be the Regia Automatic because he has done some new stuff. And first of all, the finishing of the bezel is done very nicely and it's a new way of doing it. I've never seen this before. I love the hour markers, which are hollowed out circles and elongated ellipses, which I believe are luminous material, but I'm not quite sure.
They are.
So, well, Tudor was one of the first to do it. Compliments to Perrin. Date at 12, I don't think it needs it. I think it's interesting what they did with the bicolor, so the monochromatic bicolor inlay of the lunette, the bezel inlay. My fingers are actually itching. I can see a very cool TRTS cone up here, but I think that we'll keep it at that. Thank you, Michael. Well, actually, darn you, Michael, because of you, I need to buy another watch.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll let you borrow the Regia I currently have in my possession, and I'm sure you'll fall even more in love with it. I mean, it's a really, really great thing and a good price. I think one of the very, very best brands at that price point. And he's a nice guy, very thoughtful, takes it the right way, I think, the whole approach to watchmaking. So more power to Andy, and nice shout out to Perrin. And I'm sure he'd be keen to do a TRTS special, actually. So let's inquire on that front. Alon, do you want to pick a question from the mailbag unless you have anything else to add to Perrin?
Let's go to the next one. So, Kum, our honorable TRTS network member, sent in a question about what makes a healthy market. He says, is it where second-hand items depreciate because novelties inspire new purchases sufficiently, or where consumers have to play games to obtain the unobtainium because novelties don't drum up substantial demand to overcome the desire for what went before? Rather philosophical. Maybe before we literally decipher his exact question, let me ask you this on a top level. What do you think, Rob, is a healthy watch market?
Well, I would say, I know this is maybe dodging the question slightly, but I think it's got to be a little bit of both. I think that if I had to lean one way or the other, I'd probably say I would hope that secondary articles would depreciate because the novelties are keeping the enthusiasm high and everybody's eyes pointed forward on what's coming, what's next, what's exciting, what's innovative, truly innovative. And that the older pieces, rather than becoming these sacrosanct objects that nobody can or ever had the chance to own, which is maybe the biggest problem in many cases, they become old. They become slightly niche, like they are surpassed by what has replaced them. And there's a lot of things at play here. It's not just availability. Availability is the ugly side of the question, I think. If you've got too many strictly limited pieces that nobody ever had the chance to own, or pieces that were released with no fixed number that weren't available for very long and then discontinued, as is the case with some Rolex Datejust models, for example. They come in, you see them, you want them, you try and buy them, you can't, they go. In some ways, that's even more frustrating than when it is limited to a certain number because you don't exactly know what you're playing with. But I think that there has to be more difference, there has to be more progress, there has to be more true novelty than there is currently in the newer market to inspire people to keep the ball rolling forwards, like I said. So what I mean by that is we've been caught for many, many years now in this fascination with what has gone before. And maybe it was always a necessary period for watchmaking to experience, where brands with their current manufacturing abilities, with the quality of the components they're able to make on a mass scale these days, would look backwards towards their own pasts and choose models that maybe should have had a better shake when they came out originally, models that were incredible at the time but weren't available to a wide audience because there wasn't such a wide audience of watch collectors like in the 60s or 70s or even 80s, for example, certainly the early 80s, and remake them. I get why brands wanted to do that, but where is the extremely exciting new piece that's unlike anything we've seen before? You know, you remember the furore surrounding the release of the Antarctique because it felt like, oh, now we have a new integrated bracelet steel sports watch, and it felt like a departure from the current offering. It wasn't obviously a completely different animal from the Nautilus or the Royal Oak or the Overseas or the 222 if you prefer, but it was something that added to that conversation. And then we had the Streamliner, of course, and you got models like the Octo Finissimo that we talk about ad nauseum. And I think that stuff is really exciting. That stuff is a great example of what we need more of. We need more Hamilton Venturas. We need more Amidas, shall we say, a new brand or a reborn brand that brings a completely different style to the market, similar to the GP Casquette, but there's so few models with time-telling modes of this nature. I think it's more than acceptable to have that one as well. You know, that's what I think we're lacking. Like, the conversation is not being advanced sufficiently. What do you think?
Thank you for that. I am maybe to shed a different light. From what point of perspective are we looking? So, point of view. From a retailer's perspective, obviously you want unobtainium because you can maximize margins, right? But from a consumer's point of view, a collector's point of view, you want prices to come down as much as possible. Now, so where lies the truth or the reality or the average or the medium? I always say you need rotation. You need new blood. You need, like a river, you need new influx. So things need to keep moving. So what we've seen during the pandemic, I don't think that's a healthy situation with these gigantic deltas on pricing. Everything's being hyped. I don't think that's a good thing. On the A Block to Watch Weekly that we've recorded recently, there was a discussion if any of us has bled on letting go watches. And I said, yeah, of course, I have bled as well. And there's not a bad thing because it's a hobby and hobbies may cost money. But I believe it was Ripley who said it beautifully. I never lose on watches. First of all, it never goes to zero, ever. So you don't devalue it 100%. And B, even if I get a little bit less back than that I've paid for, I've enjoyed the watch and I paid for the wear and tear of it. So I think he put that beautifully. Looking at the exact question that Com posed, if secondhand articles depreciate because novelties inspire new purchase efficiently, I think that's a good thing because older things usually depreciate, but not per se. Some models go up because if some consumers were on the fence and always wanted to buy it, you'll see that they appreciate. Posing the question about consumers playing games, I don't think that's ever a good thing. Today, still, with Rolexes, it's calming down. People are getting way more phone calls to pick up their wish list piece, and even discounts are applied on the gold pieces. I would label that as healthy, where brands, and I believe there are a few left, but I believe Audemars Piguet still does it, and even Patek, where you need to write an essay why you're eligible to buy a watch. Would I call that healthy? No. So those are my 2 cents on that.
Okay, I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions, but I'm going to try and break them down into sort of quick fire questions so I don't ramble on too much. First comment, you said as a retailer, you prefer unobtainium because obviously that inspires a purchase and you need that purchase. You need a customer to come in to want a watch to buy it. But surely what you really want is a little bit of that and a lot of desirable volume pieces, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's a different thing. Yeah, you wouldn't survive as a retailer, or maybe you'd survive as a retailer with just unobtainium if you were able to obtain enough of the unobtainable. But I mean, you need those pieces to whip up enthusiasm, maybe, or to build a brand, to add cachet to a brand. But you also need desirable pieces that people can buy instead of the bit that they can't get because there simply aren't enough of them or they're priced out of that, right? And you're saying, I think we're in agreement there that there aren't enough of those pieces relative to the unobtainable pieces on the market right now. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we've also noticed that the average price of watches sold out of Switzerland has been going up almost year on year. There were a couple of wobbles in the last 20 years, alongside an obvious trend of the volume of exports decreasing. So the brands obviously believe in a similar principle that you were espousing with the unobtainium being, a cash cow. They want to make fewer pieces and get a higher return on all of them. And we're seeing that in very clear ways with the vast growth of retail prices for standard models that haven't changed materially in the last few years. Let's take Omega as an example and use the Seamaster 300M Diver Professional and also the Speedmaster as perfect examples of that. The white dial Speedmaster now is almost twice as much as a regular black dial Speedmaster was 10 years ago. Okay?
Okay.
So they're trying to reduce their output, which is good for many reasons, because they need fewer workers, they have fewer QC concerns, they reduce their after-sales burden long term, they get more money back per piece, higher margins. There's not been the mirrored growth of wages in Switzerland to match off against the increase in margins of those products to suggest that this is just the Swiss industry doing what it has to do to stay in the same place. This is clearly a move to put more money in their pockets so that they can grow in different ways and reduce their exposure in terms of volume, as far as I see it. Would you agree?
Yes, but I kind of don't want to break your flow, so I'll remember my feedback on that. So keep going.
No, go ahead. Give me the feedback. Give me the feedback. It's important that we feed back and forth on this topic.
To nuance it a little, I'm with you 80%, but to nuance it a little bit, the current Moonwatch is very much high in price, and I'll promise you it's around 9K in whatever currency we look at, with or without VAT. It will go to 10K, and that was always the plan. But we do need to compare hardcore apples with apples and not apples and pears, peren in Dutch. You're not laughing. It was a word joke.
I love it. Yeah, that's great. I don't think that was Andy's intention when he named it Perrin, but
no, it's a stupid joke. So I'll keep going. We need to look at the 861, the 1861, and the current 3861 calibers. So Omega obviously says it adds more value, but let's be realistic. The hardcore price increases indeed have nothing to do with the inflation and the indexation of wages in Switzerland. It's mostly marketing. There's an epic TED Talk-ish presentation by George Kern where he, on stage, very visual with his hands, explains that in the watch industry, price is made up by an X amount of percentage just marketing. So we can't ignore that fact, but it isn't the exact same watch. Second tiny comment I wanted to make, a lot of the brands also in the big bunch of statistics started making more precious metal watches. So Rolex wants more gold watches. Patek wants less steel, Nautilus and Aquanauts. They made it white gold, right? The 5711 became the 5811 or something like that. So these are little nuances, but yes, in the gist of it, I agree with you. But these are very important details. But you're right. With the same labor, you create more profit.
Right.
With the same energy, you create more profit.
What you also create is fewer new watches. Now, if there's fewer new watches, there's fewer people buying those watches. I'm not necessarily suggesting that the global market of watch consumers has shrunk all that much in terms of actual numbers of people buying things to put on their wrists and tell the time. But I would say that when we see these luxury Swiss watch exports reduce in volume, what that suggests is the other people who otherwise would have maybe bought a Swatch or a Longines or a Hamilton or a Satina in the past are probably buying something like an Apple Watch or a Garmin or a Samsung. So they're still spending their money on a wrist-worn device, but they aren't spending it in the same Swiss luxury field. Okay? So what I'm wondering is if there isn't enough turnover of new models that completely destroy the old model's desirability so that their prices do fall sufficiently on a secondary market, are we going to get to a point where there's a swell of pieces, too many pieces almost, that still exist in the buying consciousness on the market for the number of watch buyers interested in luxury timepieces? And at that point, regardless of how unobtainable certain pieces were in the past, surely their prices must come down because there will be a surplus of those pieces like there never was before. Do you follow what I'm saying?
I am, and it's actually a very interesting trail of thought because, and I'm not that worried about that because obviously population is growing like crazy worldwide. The emerging markets, so the BRIC countries, are developing the appetite for luxury products, including watches. But what I'm more worried about is what if wristwatches are not en vogue, so they are not in fashion anymore, they fall out of fashion. And I don't mean even because of smartwatches so much. I think that they can coexist. Well, we've even concluded that smartwatches educate people to put a timekeeping device on their wrist. And at a certain point, they're fed up with all these notifications and they want a real watch that doesn't ping all day long. And I am a firm believer that these devices will go into our bodies. So then that will free up the wrist again. That could either be a good thing for the traditional watchmakers, or it could be that nobody wants them anymore and wristwatches have the same destiny as pocket watches to disappear in drawers.
I think pocket watches really fell out of favor due to a shift in fashion away from waistcoats, let's say. I don't think that they were ever seen as undesirable items. They just were superseded by a smaller, more wearable, more flexible technology. What is interesting, though, about what you say is there's multiple reasons why wristwatches or luxury wristwatches specifically could fall out of favor. One of them is fashion, just if it becomes not cool to have something on your wrist, or people suddenly become extremely fond of naked wrists, also possible. We've seen it with ankles in the Victorian period, so who knows what's coming. But what if they become testament to a world that is no longer one that the next generation wants to support or reference? So what I mean by that is the industrial practices of watchmaking, the waste, the pollution of the industry, which is, in comparison to many others, minimal, but still something that people are mindful of. Obviously, with this push to sustainability within watchmaking, what if watchmaking is never able to sufficiently master the sustainable production process to satisfy the desires of its new clientele? I mean, that could be the main driver for them falling out of popularity, couldn't it? Or the idea of expressing extreme wealth becomes so unpalatable that people just move away from it.
Interesting. Two things. What the first part being the sustainable aspect. The second is austerity or showing off, the flexing muscle. So the sustainable aspect, I'm quite confident that especially the mechanical watchmaking industry is safe. There's nothing more sustainable almost today. Almost any high-end or well-made watch can become antique. There are not many products today or even in the last century being made that can endure such a period and last and keep on working. And about the austerity, so being a show-off or showing off with your watch, is a good thing for all these new micro brands and etc. So I'm not worried on both accounts, if you catch my drift.
I get that, and I agree with it theoretically, but it's a different type of buyer that buys a micro brand. It's a collector of watches that's into the hobby of watchmaking, right? The buyer you described previously, the Apple Watch wearer who eventually gets sick of the pinging and whatnot and has been educated by wearing an Apple Watch to buy a proper watch to wear on their wrist, I'm not so sure that development necessarily results in a watch collector. I definitely believe it results in a luxury watch buyer in many cases. I've known many people who've gone through that journey exactly, and they never wore a watch ever. They were like, oh, why would I bother? I've got my phone in my pocket, there's clocks everywhere, my laptop's got one, blah, blah, blah. Fine, get it. They've bought an Apple Watch because they want to track their fitness, or they want to know their blood oxygen level when they're on the train, or whatever it is that they're doing. And then eventually they're like, oh, I actually kind of like wearing a watch. It adds something to my outfit. They maybe experiment with the straps that you can get with an Apple Watch, and they realize that it can be like an embellishment to their outfit and express their character in a different way. And then they go and buy, normally, in the cases I've seen, one watch from a very established brand, like a Breitling, or definitely a Rolex, or an AP even, and they buy these watches, and then that's it. That's their watch. And that part of the market has always been very important, obviously, especially when it comes to the higher end pieces, because those people have the money to just buy a luxury watch without really thinking about it in many cases. But are they necessarily watch collectors? Are they necessarily the cohort of people that the industry needs to propel it in a forward direction from where it is now in terms of a hobbyist's passion?
Interesting. Yes and no. No, because with the growing population on this beautiful planet, they're fine with just that single watch buyer or the single watch wearer. So that's okay, because that has always been that way for the watch industry. I mean, we've been originally educated that you buy one good watch and you wear it the rest of your life. The hobbyists like us, the watch collectors, the watch nerds, were the only ones that would buy multiples. The last 2 decades have created bigger quantity of collectors. It made it maybe en vogue. It's trendy. It's cool to call yourself a collector. But because watches are also becoming fashionable, and that rolls into my yes, is you'll see that one watch often is not enough to complement your outfit, or you'll have this reality where you have a connected device or a smartwatch for your workout, your sports, and you do want a nicer watch for your outfit or parties or whatever. So I'm not that worried about that.
I can tell that, yeah. And I think that your comments about population growth are obviously very relevant to the discussion, but also something that should be dug into a little further, because population growing globally doesn't necessarily mean the number of watch buyers will grow accordingly. In fact, the way I see birth rates projected around the globe, it's likely to do the opposite. I mean, so many Western countries are going to reduce in population via birth rates, and Japan, of course, is in extreme trouble with this, and that's one of the biggest watch buying markets in the world. By 2050, 2 out of 5 children will be born in Nigeria. And I don't know if those 2 out of 5 kids being born into a burgeoning population globally are going to be buying Rolexes or Pateks as frequently as we expect them to. They're not just like numbers that become part of the same group automatically. What you probably find, therefore, is the population will likely grow globally, yes, but it will reduce in the traditional watch buying markets quite significantly in all cases, but maybe China, which might increase. But then you'll have a huge amount more wealth concentrated amongst fewer individuals. Now, does that lead logically to the point, well, they'll just buy more watches per capita? Yeah, that might be the case, but not if they are themselves part of a new generation that looks at things differently and maybe is part of the Apple Watch generation that buys one super duper piece and doesn't feel like collecting multiple pieces. Or maybe when there's this growth in population but increased disparity between the wealthy and the impoverished, it becomes even less decorous to display that wealth. And so, population growth is one thing to sort of say, yeah, well, there's going to be more people, but where are those people and what means will they have? I think that's relevant to the discussion. Not something we can answer now. We can only speculate as to what the societal fluctuations will be over the next decades and centuries, but interesting, no?
Very much so. And I don't know if Com is happy that he's asked the question and got this answer, or that he regrets it right now. But
we're definitely not answering that question anymore, are we? We're somewhere else.
We are, but it's actually a very interesting and beautiful philosophical discussion where I challenge David to maybe even consider spinning this into an article so we could analyze that, because I hope that every management team of a watch brand that thinks they will survive the next 1 or 2 decades needs to think about these things. So very relevant action.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to put a cap on that question, I think what we're saying, Com, is that it's a healthy mixture of both. And we want to see more creativity and diversity in novelties, and we want secondary market prices to tumble to a reasonable level so people can enjoy the hobby and celebrate the old models without being frustrated or priced out of that pursuit. Is that a good summary?
Very much so.
Okay, next question will go for one from Bernd. He's asked us a few, which is great. We'll address at least one this episode, probably one the next episode too, because they're really good questions. Let's start with this. Bernd says, I like the mental picture of brands having to go to therapy to recover the humble and healthy relationship with customers. However, like in many broken relationships, I am afraid that the one side, the queen, here the customer, does not really recognize how she has been mistreated. What I mean here is that your diagnosis is correct from the outside, but I do not see customers running away from brands since they appear to have not perceived themselves as having been mistreated. His question: do you think our nerd perception has trickled through to the broader customer audience, or rather, based on which facts you would assume so?
Wow, we came back with a bang. Philosophical all around. Thank you, Bernd. So, we need to decompose this. Yes, the consumer is the queen. She, I think, does know she's being mistreated, but in the tumbling of the hypes, tumbling down that river, how can you get out of it? If you are in the rat race of buying, let's say, Hermes, Chanel, Prada bags, and Rolex, and Patek, and AP watches, and all other hype beast products, do they know they're being mistreated? Probably. Do they care? I don't know. He says that, so they're not running away. Then let's take us hardcore collectors. I think we have realized and we are running away. And then in the aftermath of the pandemic, let's say that all us hardcore collectors would not take the way retailers treat us if there's a very sought-after product. And now these waiting lists are diminishing and you don't need to buy it with a surplus on the secondhand market. Will you do so? I see people doing it so. Does that mean that brands are treating you better? I don't know. Actually, I find this very difficult. I'm actually very curious what you have to say, Rob.
Yeah, it's a tough question because, again, it deals with like multiple moving subjects. And what I mean by that is you identified a customer that's buying, say, Prada bags, Hermes scarves, Louboutin shoes, and that is maybe a different customer from the watch nerd, the watch collector, the watch obsessive. There's no guarantee that somebody buying a Jacob & Co. is really a watch lover. There are certain watches at certain price points that can only be afforded by very, very few people around the globe, and they don't necessitate a love for watches to be bought. Maybe the opposite in some ways, not the opposite, not a hatred of watches, obviously, but almost a hatred of, or a dismissal of the soul of the industry as we see it. And we have a tendency, all of us who love watches, for what I would say are the right reasons, although that is only my opinion. And what I mean by that is the love of the craft, what humans are able to do when they turn their mind towards a problem, the simple solutions to a complex problem that have been solved by watchmaking ingenuity over the centuries. I think that we're fascinated by these beautifully wrought, ticking objects that remind us of the ephemerality of all things. I don't think that is exactly what your average Jacob & Co. customer thinks when they sit down to try on their latest rainbow diamond bangle, as cool as they are and as well made as they may be. And so you have at least two different parts. Let's just split them arbitrarily here for the sake of argument. You've got those that buy luxury. And I think that the psychology that goes along with that kind of purchasing practice probably removes that person, those people, from the feeling that they are able to be mistreated and almost to revel in the fact that others are being mistreated by the same practices that they too are subject to, but they don't feel the pain of it because they can buy their way out of it. So if an industry is basically being evil and charging crazy money for products that shouldn't be retailing for that price realistically, those who can still afford them enjoy the fact they can buy them and others can't. And so that's one part of the market where the queen may well be being abused, but she understands that, in fact, she is a willing contractor in that relationship for whatever reason. What she gets out of it is something else. It's not even maybe the product, it's the possession of the product. The rest of us, those of us that proliferate the TRTS network, we have a tendency to look at models we cannot afford, we will probably never be able to afford, we don't even need to be able to afford to appreciate. We talk about watchmaking, we idolize the greatest makers, we obsess over the coolest complications, we share in our passion for these things that are able to be done. And so we're not even actively trying to buy a lot of the pieces that still give us joy because they exist. What frustrates us is that we can't, in many cases these days, even access the pieces that we could afford to access if they were available or made available to us. And that has created the alienation within the true soul of the community, the real heart of it, the group of people that mean watchmaking has a good chance of surviving if those people are treated well, because we're forced out of being able to actively partake in the hobby that we so adore. So that's a real problem. Do I think we're running away? We've certainly become more skeptical about the market. Of course we have. Money is not flying around willy-nilly. I'm still spending money on the products that I want. And what did I buy recently? So I've bought this year a Nomos Chili, which I guess is a piece that probably could be sold for more than I paid for it if I ever wanted to, because it's limited and it's really cool. I have bought Fortis Novanaut. It's not the limited version, standard collection. It has no real chance of appreciation unless Fortis were to discontinue that model, and I am very, very confident that they will not be moving that Novanaut on from the collection anytime soon or ever if everything goes according to plan. So that was a purchase for myself because I love the watch, I love the brand. And I bought the new Laventure Transatlantic 2, the brown one with the stainless steel bracelet, full retail, a brand that has obviously experienced huge highs in terms of hype and has come down to earth a little bit in the last couple of years with its secondary market pieces still listed way above retail, but realistically trading for a reasonable premium for limited products. I did not buy that watch thinking, oh, I'm going to sell it. In fact, I bought it thinking that the rest of watchmaking is on the wobble a little bit. And I have to be very mindful of the fact that everything I put my money into is for me. And it's not an investment. It's not something that I can even rationalize. Oh, if I don't want it in 2 years' time, I can sell it for more than I paid for it, or even close to the same amount. It has to be my watch for me. And that actually changed the way I look at my entire collection. I've been selling or trying to sell and will continue to sell a lot, almost all of my, I would say, mainstream brand pieces. So I had at one point like 5 Omegas. I think I have 1 left and I'm planning on selling it. I'm selling out of all of the things that used to be seen as like highly collectible and still are for many people, but don't give me the joy that I expect from the watches I have in my watch box. And so this whole practice that Bernd describes has actually jaded me to the point where I just have to consciously remind myself this hobby is for me. It doesn't en masse have my back. It doesn't really care how happy I am about the purchases of the products. And I have to make those decisions a bit more cynically than I maybe felt I needed to a couple of years ago. And I'm a bit saddened by that, but that is the reality.
I'm happy we didn't do some Q&As in a long time because you have a lot to share. Thank you. To answer Bernd's last sentence, do we think that the nerd perception has trickled through the broader customer audience? I think so. It's thanks to blogs, watch blogs. It's thanks to podcasts like ours. And also a big shout out to all those new brands, the micro brands, because there is an alternative to buy other watches besides the mainstream. So I think all of that has kind of led to what his hypothesis is. So I kind of confirm his hypothesis.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sense in it. I think it's unfortunately the truth. I think that it's natural. I hope that there are changes on the horizon and that the industry can win back the love of its abused partner, us, the customer.
Yeah, good one. And I think that half of them will. Half of them are so ignorant, so stuck in their ivory tower, or as some like to say, up their own asses that either they'll literally realize it when they're about to drive off the cliff, or simply they will crash and burn. So it seems some don't really never learn.
I guess we see that in humans as well, but that's probably a different podcast that we should maybe start as part of the network. Let's move on to Lawrence's question via WhatsApp. Thanks, Lawrence. Always a very active and engaged member of the network. He says, watch purchases are a very individual thing, so no judgment at all. But if that's the watch you liked so much to sign up to a waiting list, for example, when you get it, enjoy it. And if it's replaced or discontinued, I'd be happy that you know the volume of that production is therefore fixed. If, hypothetically, they, as in the brand, bring out a super cool new blue dial instead of, and he references here, is fluted motif dial date just, he won't lament it. On the contrary, he would admire the new one, but be even more happy there's a fixed quantity in the world of the one he owns and that no more will be produced. What is your take on this? So how do we feel about when a watch that we've bought finds itself discontinued?
I'm actually quiet because I'm thinking on the one hand, yeah, it's a good thing because there are less of them. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, how cool is it that you still can buy a moonwatch with as minimal as possible iterations and changes? So I stand on two legs. I am ambiguous. I don't know. It is what it is. I love the fact that products hardly change over the decades. I think there's something romantic in there. But I also love innovation and evolution and change and improvements. So I can't even vote. I don't know. It is what it is, right? I mean, maybe one final comment on this. Thank God there is a secondhand market. If you missed or snoozed on a particular version of a watch and you can't obtain it anymore through the AD or the brand or the monobrand boutique or the website or wherever, you'll always have the secondhand market. And the secondhand market is more fair in a way because it will reflect the true demand of a product through its pricing, either higher than the original price or lower. And it's ruthless. So it is what it is. So those are my 2 cents on this topic, but very interesting question, Lawrence. Thank you.
Yeah, I love this question. I really love your answer as well. I was thinking, there's a couple of ways to go about this answer. There's more than 2. The first response I had was to say, okay, well, very selfishly, I must admit that if a watch I bought, especially one that wasn't limited, okay, so one that I just identified as a piece that I want that for my collection. I want to wear that and enjoy it. If it's discontinued, there is a sort of rush of excitement in my heart, maybe, because I think, okay, well, the value of that piece, emotional value, has increased because it's no longer available. Then again, what are watches? What is emotional value? To me, extremely limited watches ignore one of the essential lures of this hobby, and that is community. And the thought that you can run into a fellow watch lover, and of all the many hundreds of thousands of watches out there in the world that we can choose from, we've chosen the same piece, is thrilling. I love that. I see something of myself, obviously, in somebody else wearing the same watch. You look at each other, you smile, you nod, okay, you might have bought it for different reasons, but you've bought the same watch. And that's a cool thing. That builds connections very quickly between 2 people with a shared interest. And so in that sense, it's a shame that the opportunity for other people to buy into the same thing that I, in this example, had bought into because I loved it. The Moon watch is a brilliant example of something there should really be more of in the industry. Okay, say what we want about current pricing. I think it's abhorrent. Oh, I said it. I wasn't going to say it, but I said it. But the fact that it's barely changed, and that it really is a great example of true evolution, not revolution, over many decades, and still calls back to the original and is defined by the original. And I mean, by original, I mean the one that landed on the moon. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing, because that is something that you could grow up watching your mom or your dad wearing, and you could aspire to own. And you one day, if you put your money away and you're sensible, you can buy it. That is super cool. That is a real passion driver in the industry. So the fact that there are models like that have a good reason to still exist and exist in a very similar form to the way they did originally is wonderful, I think. I do like the fact that we have a secondary market, because there are some watches I snoozed on. And again, I'm going to have to use limited examples here, which does not make the point particularly well, because limited is slightly different than a core model that's been discontinued. But once again, I've got a reference L'Aventure. I was one of the first people to buy into the brand with the first release. I bought the second release. I skipped the third, never regretted anything as much as that in the watch collecting hobby. I skipped the fourth because I thought the price was getting a little bit out of hand. And then I went in for the fifth, which was almost twice as much as the fourth, because they changed the movement, and I was like really wowed by the progression of the brand, and I wanted to like reestablish my connection to it. Skipped the sixth because it had basically the same movement, but without the chronograph module on it than the fifth one that I bought. And I bought in again on the seventh. Do I now wish I bought the third, fourth, and the sixth? Yes, I do. Do I now aspire one day to basically cash out of all of my mainstream brands and just say, oh, I'm a L'Aventure guy, I'm a Nomos guy, I'm a Straum guy, I'm an Archanaut guy, and I look at my box and I've maybe got 4 or 5 from each brand in there, the same thing. Some people might see that as limited. Some people might see that as blinkered. Totally fine if you see it that way. That's anyone individual's prerogative. That's how I'm feeling right now. I want to be a curator of the brands that I believe extol the virtues I think are most important in terms of design and the passion in the community. And yeah, okay, the limitation of some of those pieces is a little bit of an awkward reality, but that's how I feel about that. So thank God for the secondary market, and thank God for being able to like go back and get the pieces that you were too slow or poor or ignorant to buy at the time. But great question. Really lovely one. Right, well, that seems like a good point to wrap up this episode. It has been a lot of fun getting back into the mailbag, and as Alon intimated, it's obviously been a while since we sat down and talked, because I particularly was chattering on like a maniac, and I apologize for dominating the mic a little bit there, Alon, but these were great questions, really philosophical ones that encouraged us to think a little bit further than occasionally we have to, but all questions are welcome. If you'd like to get involved in the show, you can contact us via the usual channels, either via email, either Rob, Alon, or David at therealtime.show, via the contact form on the website, www.therealtime.show, or via our official Instagram handle at therealtime.show. If you'd like to join the TRTS network, which is our WhatsApp group, you can just send us a message via any channel and we will add you to it post haste. We'll be back soon with more top quality watch content. Until then, stay safe and keep on ticking.